By 1970, Britain was a television nation. ITV had been the catalyst for the rise in popular TV, and belatedly the BBC had fought back with its groundbreaking television of the 60s.
Bloody blasphemous bastard! Just move on!
But it was the 70s that would see the Showbiz Set become the most famous and wealthy people in the nation. But they would also feel unparalleled pressure as they pushed themselves to the brink of health and sanity.
I would drink at least half a dozen stiff vodkas, just enough to feel no pain.
I found he was on amphetamines, which like speed, and I had this lunatic on my hands.
The worry and the concern and the energy that he gave to everything cost him his life in the end, really.
At the turn of the decade, ITV programmes still filled almost every spot in the television top 10, but they had no idea what was about to hit them. The BBC, sleepy old auntie, was about to launch a full frontal assault on the cream of ITV's entertainment stars. In less than 12 months, they would steal commercial television's newest hit duo to form the Two Ronnies and give ITV's rising young star Mike Yarwood his own primetime show on the Beeb.
Good morning, housewives! Are you getting enough?
And in the biggest coup of all time, the BBC would poach a double act who would come to deliver the highest ratings in the history of television.
He's not going to sell much ice cream going at that speed, is it?
It was big stuff in those days. You know, Morecambe and Wise defecting. That was a huge story. And there was a lot of money involved as well.
One needed to have the great stars, and if they were available for transfer, then why not ask?
That's how you hope to make your money, I suppose, that somebody tempts you with a lot more money than you're getting where you are now.
The BBC didn't just steal the big names, but would transform them into megastars who would revolutionise their network. The Morecambe and Wise show on ITV in the late 60s still hadn't developed much from their days in the variety hall.
Morecambe and Wise were essentially what was called in vaudeville the front of curtain act. The curtain comes down on the big event and they come on and do a shtick. It worked on TV because although you could expand it and show everything happening behind them, you could still keep the close-up.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
What's the matter with you? Come closer!
We're close enough.
I want to tell you something!
Tell me from there. From there.
I don't want everybody to know!
I think they've already guessed.
They had a natural feel for television. You can't work as if you're on a stage with television. Eric always said the camera's eavesdropping. We're just talking, camera's eavesdropping.
Motor cars, aeroplanes...
During the 60s, Morecambe and Wise had been solid performers for ITV boss Lou Grade. But they weren't setting the world on fire. So when they demanded more money from Grade, he turned them down flat. His own nephew Michael, however, was agent for the duo and tipped off the opposition.
Michael Grade phoned me up one day and said that they had failed to come to an agreement with Lou Grade about a further contract because he wouldn't pay them the money that they thought they should get. And was I interested in getting them? And I said, where are you? And Michael said, I'm in the office. I said, stay there, I'm in a taxi now.
The BBC attracted Morecambe and Wise with an enormous contract, but immediately made radical moves to improve their act. The show would be in colour, and the duo's on-screen characters would be totally transformed by a new writer called Eddie Braben. Before he met them, he wasn't even a fan of their work.
I didn't particularly like Morecambe and Wise on ATV in black and white. I thought Eric was too gormless, and Ernie was very, very abrasive. No character at all except this very abrasive little man.
Get off! Huh? I said get off.
But he wasn't like that. See, what I did when we had this meeting, I watched them both. I could see the characteristics they had, the little mannerisms, words they liked, and most important of all, I watched the relationship between the two men. And I could see that there was enormous affection between these two men. All I did was bring out these characteristics. I did say before I left that meeting that when I came back with my work, it would be different from anything I'd ever done before. I could only write the way I saw them.
Ladies and gentlemen, the British Broadcasting Corporation proudly presents the Morecambe and Wise Show.
The makeover of Morecambe and Wise led to a dramatic transformation in their fortunes. The public fell in love with their hapless and playful banter, which simply reflected the real off-camera affection between the two men.
Hello, Anne. My little fat friend. Can't see the joint? That's one of the best you've ever had, that is a beauty. Arrived this morning all the way from Axminster.
They had this particularly wonderfully funny style, which was them being them. And they had to keep this very bubbly, champagne kind of dialogue that Eric and Ernie was Eric and Ernie.
I don't think they realised it. They were actually being themselves, because I was writing them as they were, with funny lines, and it worked.
What you say your name was? Tom. Oh, I'll have to change that. Yeah. Music.
And in what proved a brilliant innovation, the BBC team brought in celebrity guest stars as comic foils for the duo.
I know I've waited. Know I've been blue. Wait each night for someone exactly like you.
By the time Morecambe and Wise unveiled their 1971 Christmas special, they were attracting audiences of over 20 million people.
Exactly like
they were now the biggest assets the BBC had ever had.
you make me feel so bad.
Their enormous success started with the Christmas show. They were then the uncrowned kings, really, of British comedy.
Ironically, the man that would give the BBC their first #1 in the 70s ratings was not poached from ITV, but rescued from obscurity.
The Generation Game, nice to see you. To see you.
Bruce Forsyth had led the way for commercial television in the late 50s, but his career had petered out in the 60s.
My television career wasn't much at all. I was doing the odd shot here and there, but nothing that really meant anything. And that didn't happen until 1971 with Bill Cotton.
Bill Cotton was keen to remould Forsyth's career, but the star wasn't keen on the BBC's plan to resurrect his game show past.
I've got enough trouble tonight without you. Right. 30 at the top, starting from now.
He was world class as a conductor of a game show on television, but he wasn't all that keen to do it. I mean, he actually preferred to be a musical specials. I mean, that's what he wanted to do. But in the end, he agreed to do the Generation Game, to give it a try, and it was an immediate success.
The Generation Game was a revolutionary Dutch format that made the public the stars. Forsyth, as the host, revelled in the opportunities to embarrass the contestants, and the result drew in massive audiences.
First one.
Bruce Forsyth is the reason, the absolute reason. The one performer who could mix it with contestants and his wonderful gift for insulting people enormously amiably and never seeming to offend them.
You collect stamps? Yes. Oh, I can see that. How many books do you need for that outfit?
For the BBC, Bruce Forsyth was the crucial piece of the jigsaw. By strategically placing the Generation Game early in the schedule, they hoped to secure an audience that would stay with the BBC for the vital Saturday night period. But still, their new star didn't like it.
I was still an 8 o'clock man. I wanted to be on at 8 o'clock. So I was always moaning, I want to be, a little bit later. No, you're doing marvellous there. And I stayed there, and of course they were right. I was absolutely wrong, because within 6-7 weeks we were getting 14 million. And then when it really started cracking together, about 3 or 4 years after that, we were getting a regular audience of 19 million viewers.
It was just blockbusting time, and ITV on a Saturday night, for quite a while, people just staying away in droves, because the BBC would lock the family in early on and hang on to them, which, caused ITV to just lie down in a darkened room and take some pills. They thought, we can't compete with this. It was just brutal.
By 1973, the BBC had reversed its fortunes and established itself as the home of great British entertainment.
There were 8 studios around the corridor, of which about 4 were big enough to do entertainment shows. And you could be in there with Dad's Army in one studio, and Monty Python in another studio, and Morecambe and Wise in another studio. Yarwood could be there, Parkinson could be there talking to Jimmy Cagney. You knew you were in a star-studded studio system, and there is no doubt they were the great days.
A golden age of TV entertainment was about to take off. Wealth and power would be bestowed on the stars, but the pressure to succeed was about to reveal some ugly consequences to fame. By the mid-70s, television success promised new levels of wealth and fortune. Membership of exclusive golf clubs, home counties mansions and chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royces became de rigueur. TV fame was about to transform the lives of an elite band and deliver a handful of middle-aged men a pop star lifestyle.
The wealth was pouring in. At one point, Benny Hill was worth about 13-14 million.
It sounds terribly materialistic, but they are synonymous with success, things like Rolls-Royces and OBEs. So.
And the benefits of power and fame weren't all financial.
I was a couture fashion model for an Italian firm. Bruce tracked me down, and it was obviously that there was some kind of chemistry going on between us.
We'd all sleep with all the guys. Yeah, we were sleeping with everybody all the time, several times a day.
No one's bank balance was transformed more dramatically than Mike Yarwood. Within weeks of performing in summer season, he had a prime-time Saturday night series and was catapulted into the surreal world of the Showbiz Set.
Let's meet the first of our 2 teams. First, representing the funny men, we have
Ronnie Corbett, small comedian, part-time garden gnome, and lover of tall women, will bring own trampoline.
People don't know, looking back, what a massive star he was. He was the first impressionist to have his own show. This had never been known. Impressionists had been on shows as supporting acts and everything, but I can't think of an impressionist who was a star. And Mike was, and he was absolute king of the castle for a while at the BBC.
Yarwood's meteoric rise to fame turned his life upside down as he became a symbol of everything small-screen stardom could buy.
We bought a lovely white house, and it was a huge, great garden. I could chip 9 irons and with my golf clubs and everything in the lawn at the back. And I used to look around. I used to sit in the garden sometimes and look around at this and think, yeah, you know, you've made it now. You've been successful.
To hide behind someone.
But the overnight success soon went to Yarwood's head. He was earning so much money he didn't know what to do with it.
When I'd had a few drinks, I would spend more than I should do, you know. I bought my wife a mink coat, and then a year or so later I bought her another mink coat. I was compulsive. I decided I would have 6 evening suits, dinner suits made. That was crazy, really. I didn't need to have 6 of these suits, but I did.
Claire and I have never, ever doubted his love for us, ever. But I think being a celebrity, if that's what you want to call it, or doing the job that he did, is such a strange job. And I think it's quite hard to then be a normal person, if you like.
Fame does such strange things to you.
I think, and it's such an unrealistic way to live in the public eye.
By the mid-70s, the rewards and trappings of the affluent elite were attracting some widespread attention. And in a bizarre twist, Yarwood became a symbol of capitalism to some 70s anarchists.
I got a letter, a death threat. I don't particularly like to talk about it because whoever wrote the letter might still be around and think that it still concerns me, but it did at the time. Special branch looked at this letter from the so-called Angry Brigade, and they said it was a hoax. It was handwritten. It wasn't little different types of letters stuck on. It was handwritten, and they said, "Oh, it's just a hoax. Don't worry about it." And I thought, well, that's easy for you to say, looking over your shoulder all the time.
While Yarwood dealt with the problems of his newfound wealth, ITV's biggest star was coping with wages that took him into a league of his own. Benny Hill was the envy of every other member of the Showbiz Set, not only because he was by far the wealthiest, but because his appeal was international. Hill's comedy had made it in the promised land of America.
This vast wasteland of bogs and marshes has, over the last 17 years, claimed no fewer than...
Somebody there knew that this visualness would sell abroad. And indeed it did, to Spain and France and places like that. And when it took off in America, of course, it was like pow. Then the whole of the world, if something's big in America, the rest of the world wants to buy it, which is exactly what happened with Benny.
I think he made it big because he was a fat, sexless man chasing thin, sexy females, and for the same reason it worked in the States, because they've got the same problem.
It was nearly soft porn, as far as the Americans were concerned, shown at 10 o'clock at night. And it created an enormous success.
By the mid-70s, Benny Hill was an international celebrity and multi-millionaire, but was seemingly unable to comprehend what it meant.
I remember him saying to me, what I do is I get these checks and I put them behind a little plaster devil. I've got a little plaster devil on the mantelpiece there, and I put checks there because that's the best place for them, and I know where they are, see? And then when the little plaster devil looks as if he's going to tip over and shatter on the hearth, I think, oh, better send these in. And I send them in. But I never read them. Money meant nothing to Benny.
We're talking in millions of pounds here, but it didn't bother him in the least. He loved it, but it didn't bother him.
Next week's script. What a lot of rubbish!
While the rest of the Showbiz Set lived in mansions, Benny Hill was living a lonely, isolated existence.
He was very reclusive, and in some ways, he was retarded in the ways of the world. He bought the flat next door to himself, but never furnished it. He kept it for years and years empty so that nobody else would move in, and that he could be completely solitary on that floor.
The indulgences of TV's rich and famous were becoming more extreme, but Benny Hill was the decided exception. While the nation's top entertainers may not have looked like pop idols, they were happy to lead the lifestyle. Along with money, beautiful women became the ultimate accessory, and Bruce Forsyth the most public collector.
Male stars in television, as in any other field, pull a lot of women for one reason and for one reason only. It's not because of their good looks, which have usually, if they ever had any, have vanished long before or are hidden under some strange wig. It is because they're famous. There are some women who will give themselves to famous men for good or ill, and there's not an awful lot we can do about it.
Anybody can criticise my performance, but when it comes to the other side, that's not on.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The other side of Bruce's life was about to set him on a collision course with his tabloid tormentors. The nation was going crazy over rumours of an affair between 41-year-old Bruce and his 21-year-old hostess, Anthea Redfern.
And I like it again.
The tabloid real interest seemed to start once they realised that we were starting to have some kind of relationship, we were falling in love, etc., etc. And then it was unbelievable. It was sort of literally on the billboards, read all about it, Bruce Forsyth in love.
A press frenzy was breaking out as it became clear that the on-screen stars were having more than a passing fling. Bruce was still married to dancer Penny Calvert, and she was about to become one of the first in a long line of jilted partners to sell her story of TV marriage breakdowns.
There was one Christmas that Penny described when Bruce was taking calls from Anthea throughout Christmas Day. She kept, or at least Penny was taking calls from Anthea, and she wouldn't put them through to Bruce. And in the end, she went upstairs where Bruce was lying on the bed with Sean Connery watching TV. And she said, "You better take this call. This woman is driving me mad."
Bruce had proposed to me and everything. And he had literally said to me, you know, how else would I have got the number? He had literally said to me, here's the number. When you've sort of reached a decision or you need to speak to me about anything, just ring me through on the house number, because the marriage was over between Penny and Bruce.
Bruce, apparently, according to Penny, took the call and said, "Oh, my darling, I'm sorry, I'll come round straight away." Penny went to the kitchen, so she says, and got a knife and planned to stab him with it. But Sean Connery came into the kitchen and said, "No, no, no, put that down, you silly ass."
Bruce insists the story is all an early example of tabloid invention and made a point of seeking out Chris Hutchins.
This man got my ex-wife Penny and took her out to dinner and was giving her champagne glass after glass and all this and this sort of thing. And he made up a completely fabricated story. I did see Chris Hutchins a few years ago, and I just took him to one side and I took him to one side, and I don't think he'll ever bother me again.
I never heard anything from Bruce, how he felt about that story, until many years later, when I saw him at a Showbiz party, and he came up and stuck that rather long chin, and I remember saying to him, "Why the long face, Bruce?" And he was not amused.
While Bruce's love life was plastered all over the papers, news of Benny Hill's private affairs remained elusive.
He was an enigma to the press. The tabloids couldn't get at him. He didn't want to give interviews, and he didn't talk about his private life. They were unable to link him to anybody, and this bothered them. And there was either the insinuation that he was gay, which is totally untrue, or that he was a recluse, which was true to a point, but they could never pigeonhole him.
Action!
But more than any of the other 70s Showbiz Set, Benny Hill's fame and fortune was the key to getting what he wanted from the women around him.
Ben would take one or two of them out to lunch to find out if they could sing, dance, act, what kind of personality they were, and then take them back to his place for some champagne and put a cab on for them, and off they'd go. And then the next week he'd be doing it with two other girls.
Benny would invite you round to lunch. We'd go to his bedroom. I would strip off to my underwear, and he would lie there, prone, and I pleasured him without any kind of, there was no kind of penetration at all. It's just me pleasuring him with what is known as a BJ.
If they had been very friendly with him, he would make them a small gift. Panties. He had different colours of panties, red, black and green, and he bought a job lot of a perfume called Primitif, which didn't sell very well because people couldn't pronounce it, and they'd give a horrible sort of bottle, and he'd give them that. So if they had 3 bottles of Primitif and all 3 shades of panties and nightwear, they'd been there 9 times.
It was like, in a way, the casting couch. I knew, he said, "Please, Uncle Benny," and I would please him because I knew it meant I was going to get, on another show, and that's what I wanted.
By the second half of the decade, the Showbiz Set were taking full advantage of their celebrity status. But the trappings of fame were dependent on staying at the top of the tree. And for some of the Showbiz Set, the pressure was beginning to tell. By the end of 1976, the BBC had not only established themselves as the leaders in the battle to entertain the television nation, but they had virtually turned Christmas from a religious festival into a television event.
BBC always used to make a very big thing of Christmas. That's why they called Auntie BBC. They remember Christmas and anniversaries. There's anniversary of anything comes up, BBC have got shows.
The Morecambe and Wise Christmas specials led the way, year on year setting a new benchmark for the highest audience in the history of television. The nation was captivated as celebrities were lovingly ridiculed by the boys.
Something wrong with the violins? No, there's nothing wrong with the violins.
That's only your opinion.
You're playing all the wrong notes.
I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order.
After universal acclaim, the BBC stars were set the task of topping all previous efforts in the Silver Jubilee year, 1977. But the initial signs were showing this might be a bridge too far, as behind the scenes the production teams were feeling the pressure.
We always aimed to make the next show more successful than the last. And if the last show, as they indeed all were, was successful, it became much harder each time. The pressure became great.
Eric Morecambe's health had been seriously affected by pressure. He had already suffered a serious heart attack, and the BBC agreed to cancel the duo's regular series so they could concentrate solely on the Christmas show of 1977.
Most people in those days used to wonder what films we were going to show over Christmas. And for that particular Christmas, all people talked about was who are the stars who are going to appear with Morecambe and Wise on their Christmas show, and what are they going to do? It was the most unbelievable interest in that thing.
Morecambe and Wise had hoped that concentrating on just this one show would ease the pressure, but if anything, the public anticipation just increased the strain.
I was talking to Eric Morecambe, and it was in December, and I said, "How's your Christmas show looking?" And in the course of the conversation, he said, "Do you realise that we are Christmas? If we do a bad show, people have a bad Christmas." And he said, "I don't really want that. That Christmas should be on my shoulders."
It wasn't easy, and I think Eddie Braben had probably the most difficult job with writing it, to be able to sit down with 40 pages of foolscap and fill it with very strong material. It's a terrible job.
Eddie Braben was the unsung hero who had transformed Morecambe and Wise. Writing from his house in Liverpool, he had the constant pressure to make every show better still.
I used to dislike going to London intensely. Every time I went down, I was going to be judged. You could see the look on their faces was, is this one awful? Is this the one where he's missed? Is this the one where he starts to go? And I'm thinking exactly the same. And I'm sitting there waiting.
That's quite right. That's quite all right. Have a yo-yo.
And the laugh, you hear the chuckles, then you hear the laughs, and you go, "We're okay this time."
When we read through, Eric would laugh his socks off at all the stuff. And then, as soon as Eddie had gone for the train, Eric would say, "John, I think that opening, could you have a word with him, in Liverpool, and perhaps do something about it?" And when I did that, Eddie would say, "Well, he was laughing like mad when I read it through yesterday." I said, "Yeah, but you should be getting used to it. He doesn't want to annoy you."
I'd been writing non-stop, sometimes 60 hours a day. I was sitting in this office I had at home. I looked down to the skirting board, and I actually saw, I swear to God, I saw this hairy thing, like a ball, go right across the skirting board and round the room, round past her. And next thing I remember, I was in bed. I just fell over the typewriter.
As they began rehearsals, the team were getting signs that not only Eddie, but also Eric was feeling the strain.
I think the stress that affected Eric very, very much when he started to get these heart problems. I can remember on one occasion, it worried me terribly, I saw his lips absolutely go blue. And I thought, my God, I've got to stop now. I said, let's break. He said, no, let's carry on working.
Eric was still under pressure. You can't take away that pressure. It's not even the answer to say, well, let's do fewer shows in the year, because you've got more time to worry then between each show, you see.
With the biggest show of their career looming, the team split up. Producer John Ammons left to join another show preparing for its all-important Christmas special. But he was jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire as the strains of fame finally revealed themselves on Mike Yarwood.
I think the 70s was my most successful decade. I feel that I spoiled a lot of it because I went into heavy drinking then.
He was a man who had obviously the talent to come into the business and didn't seem to have the temperament to cope with the fame and the pressure of doing the show. So, as he himself says, and I hope he wouldn't mind me concurring with this, he was drinking when I worked with him at the BBC. 2 or 3 scotches would go down before the show.
I would drink at least half a dozen stiff vodkas, just enough to get a buzz on, you know, just enough to feel no pain. But you see, the thing is that then you get to the theatre sluggish and you need a pick-me-up then. I would have a couple of vodkas and tonic before a show. Then I went on to wine, which I felt was less harmful, not as lethal as spirits. But all I was doing really was drinking, instead of drinking too much vodka, I was drinking too much wine.
You know how to make me quit drinking? No, Dean, I don't know how to make you quit drinking. I'm very pleased to hear that, Pally.
On screen, Yarwood was the biggest entertainer of the decade, and the approaching Christmas show should have been the pinnacle of his career. In fact, Yarwood's home life was falling apart.
Tell in his eyes when he'd had a drink.
You can just sense it. He didn't even need to open his mouth.
No, it would
I could see from when he walked through the door across the room, I could see. And I can remember that at the age of 5. Those are my sort of first recollections. I was thinking, Daddy's not Daddy.
It was a total personality change.
Oh, it makes me cringe to think about it, that the drinking became more important than anything else, you know. And I spent less and less time with the children because when I wasn't in the pub, I was at home sleeping it off or something, you know. I missed my first daughter's first birthday because I was too hungover, you know. I mean, that's the saddest thing I can think of, actually. It makes me very sad to think about that.
There were many times that I felt I wished he was dead. Perhaps it sounds very shocking, but I think if you ask any other daughter of an alcoholic if they've ever felt like that,
It was more out of kindness, really. He was crawling up the walls. He was in so much turmoil.
You will do that?
Have you been drinking heavily?
Not recently.
For the people that were working closely with him, he must have been a right pain because you were trying to get a job done, and some days he wasn't able to get that job done, I don't think, because of the drink.
He never got really plastered and lying on the floor or anything like that, but it did interfere with the concentration, and I think he would agree now it interfered with his work and made him more worried than ever, in fact, when, of course, he had the idea that drinking would take away the worries, but it never does, unfortunately.
At ITV, they had no idea that the BBC's big-name acts were in such turmoil. Faced with such an all-star lineup, they effectively ran up a white flag and scheduled repeats of Bing Crosby singing carols.
Of a white Christmas. What was wrong with the show was that he would import these, dare we say it, aged, sometimes deceased American stars, who would be there on screen, tottering towards you and saying, "Be of good cheer," and the result was somehow infinitely depressing.
It was no surprise as Christmas Day evening arrived that the BBC were going to win the ratings war, but the extent of the margin was to send ripples through the television world for decades. At 7:15 in the evening, Bruce Forsyth got Generation Game contestants to eat as many donuts as they could without licking their lips and pulled in 26 million people. By the time Mike Yarwood's show was broadcast at 8:20, the BBC audience had risen to a record 27 million.
Now, don't waste your time switching to the other channel. They're only showing all those commercials for summer holidays you won't be able to afford.
Finally, just before 9 o'clock, half the population was sitting down waiting to see the Morecambe and Wise show that had been almost a year in the making.
The shows have been great coming up to that point. Had we topped it or not? And when the show started, I thought, yes, it's looking good. Everything's working. And I started to cry with relief.
Right, keep smiling. Now, let's go forward.
The show's audience peaked at over 28 million people for the musical finale featuring a host of star names and cutting-edge camera trickery.
Everybody can remember that. And one of the great things was picking out who you knew. The Frank Boffs, the Michael Aspells. I remember them doing it with such gusto. And it was almost like auditioning, saying, see, we don't just sit behind a news desk, this is what we can do.
The audience watching at home was the highest ever recorded for a British television programme.
I remember John Hammond's ringing and say that we've got 28 million people. Sheer total astonishment. You know, it's half the population.
The remarkable audience figures for the entertainment shows of Christmas 1977 would go down in television history. But there would be a cost to almost everyone involved. The BBC empire and the Showbiz Set was about to fall apart at the seams. By the end of the 70s, the BBC had made their entertainers into national icons, millionaires who pulled in the audiences even to look at their waxwork. But a decade after being stripped of their talent, ITV was preparing to launch a devastating raid for their former stars. But it was a gamble that ultimately failed. British television's first Showbiz Set was reaching retirement age. In 1978, ITV stole Bruce Forsyth from the BBC for the relaunch of their Saturday night schedule.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, children. Nice to see you. To see you. Nice! Well, what else could I say? Remember on ITV, we're the channel you get for free. So let's get the network together. Don't worry about the weekend weather. It's the big night in on ITV. I can't see you, but you can see me on the network. Every Saturday night. Get the whole of the network together tonight.
What seemed like a good idea was to get Bruce Forsyth from the BBC and devote almost the entire Saturday night to Bruce. Bruce as performer, Bruce as interviewer, Bruce as game show host.
It's Bruce Forsyth's Big Night, and with Bruce tonight, America's sensational singing star, Bette Midler.
The Big Night was the show Bruce Forsyth had always craved. He compared big-name stars, played games and conducted interviews for 2 hours of Saturday night.
Bruce's great love is the song and the dance, the Sammy Davis syndrome. That's what he really wanted to be.
16 dazzling dancers, 32 feet. Oh, happy
day. The first show had a tremendous audience. I brought down a bottle of champagne. We toasted Bruce.
Right,
Thank you.
Second show, the audience was about two-thirds. Third show had gone down to half. It was too much.
Now look, so you're going to leave us soon and all that sort of thing, but you know, and although you've enjoyed yourself...
Well, excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, but I mean...
I still have 20 minutes to go on this show.
I wish...
My God, it seems like a long time. Go ahead, Bruce, just jump in when you feel like it.
I got a feeling that television fame depends almost entirely on the format. In other words, Bruce Forsyth doing Generation Game is one thing, but when he does something like The Big Show, it's another. An awful lot depended on the format, which is something the stars don't want to admit.
You cannot fight what the public know you for, and they decree. No, we want what we want, and he's the great game show host.
That was the kind of show I loved Bruce in. I thought it was fantastic, but the public didn't want to watch him do that. They suddenly they had it in their heads that that's what he was, a game show guy.
Am I still here?
Yes, you do.
Despite the series' £2 million budget, Bruce had only 13 big nights before ITV pulled the plug. Ironically, his next incarnation would be back as a host of a game show called Play Your Cards Right on ITV.
Well, I've finally done it. I've finally signed a contract with ITV. I'm just waiting for them to sign now. Well, I've got to admit, they've all been so...
Publicly, Mike Yarwood was another major coup for ITV. But privately, he was in a downward alcoholic spiral.
He hit rock bottom, basically, and they say this with a lot of alcoholics. You know, you hit the point where you can't go any lower, and you either, you know, lie down and die, or you get up.
I needed to go and get help and be with other people who'd got sober and found that their lives had become unmanageable.
For once I can say this is...
Yarwood finally kicked the bottle, but it wasn't enough to help his flagging career. As the 80s began, it was clear that he and his style of show were exhausted.
Of course, he'd lost his crutch, his support system, so he became indecisive and maybe even more alarmed by the doing of the show, because he had not got that Dutch courage anymore.
The show ran on BBC and then onto ITV for 16 consecutive years. And I think about that now, and I think of, you know, how quiet things are now, and I think, well, you know, you had a good innings. And now I haven't had a drink as we speak. I haven't had, touch wood, I haven't had a drink for 9 years now. Is it no, it's 10 years. 10 years.
He seems a much happier, settled man. It's a great shame that someone can't enjoy the success while they're having it, and may not even remember some of it.
Finally, ITV set their sights on winning back the BBC's star attraction.
You'll be telling me next you've heard a voice from the other side. I have. It was Lou Gray, but the money was no good.
Eric told me we've had this offer from Thames Television. And I said, how much? And he told me the sum. And I said, all right, we'll pay it. Now, but will you do 2 years for that money? And he said yes. Now, we'd both had quite a bit to drink by then. And I really forgot about it. I mean, they were great mates of mine. I mean, I was very fond of them, and I'd like to think they were very fond of me.
Although Cotton thought he had averted disaster, the lure of an enormous contract led to Eric and Ernie signing with Thames Television behind his back.
I'm not so sure that Bill Cotton was actually in the know, because I think he would have upped the money and pretty well equaled what the vast increase. I'm not too sure what it was, but I know it was pretty big, to go to Thames, you see. I think Bill, if he'd been given the opportunity, but I think at the time he found out, they'd signed up.
The phone went, and it was my secretary. And she said, I've got some very bad news for you. I said, what's that? She said, Morecambe and Wise have gone. And I said, gone where? And I really hadn't remembered the conversation. And she said, they've gone to Thames Television. And it was just like a divorce. I mean, I really felt very bitter.
Eric and Ernie's move promised a new challenge and more money, but there was a fatal flaw. The BBC refused to release the man who had masterminded their transformation.
Welcome to Thames. We've been so looking forward to working with you. Come this way.
With a show like Morecambe and Wise, the hardest thing to assess is the effect of the writing, but it's crucial. And when Morecambe and Wise moved from the BBC to Thames, Eddie Braben, their writer, didn't come with them, and they were, I won't say at the mercy, but they had to work with a new production staff and new writers, and I don't think the effect was quite the same.
I didn't want to go to Thames. I couldn't see why we were going to Thames, because we had everything we wanted at the BBC. Production team, shows were going well.
I worked with you when you were on the other side.
You mean when I was like this?
When we were like this? No. When you were with the BBC. Oh. Is it all right to say the BBC? Yes, it is all right to say the BBC.
The BBC. Yeah, bring back comedy.
Eddie wasn't available, so we went backwards and repeated some of the old stuff. Eric was saying at rehearsals, oh dear, we seem to be doing much the same stuff.
They did 4 or 5 shows and realised that they weren't what they wanted, and they stopped and said, we won't do any more till Eddie is free of the BBC. And this is what happened. So I went into Bill Cotton's office and I headbutted him. I said, I'm going to Thames. He said, no, you're not. And he got this soda siphon and got me on the back, just behind the ear. He got me here. And it was awful. And that was why I went to Thames. When he hit me with the soda siphon, that was it. I said, I'm going now, Bill.
What do you think of it so far? Oh, that's a lovely attitude, that is.
By the time Braben joined them 2 years later, it was clear that Britain's best-loved comedy duo would never achieve the giddy heights they had on the BBC. What's more, the pressure of performing was adding to Eric Morecambe's health problems.
Eric devoted as much nervous energy to 2 or 3 shows a year as he used to devote to, a weekly turnaround at ATV. So in effect, the strain on him was just the same. Just the same, even though their workload wasn't as heavy.
You could call him a worry guts. But I mean, that was to the advantage of his performance, because he worried about his performance. But he probably didn't stop worrying, even when he was at home, really.
The comedian Eric Morecambe, who made millions laugh for more than 40 years, has died. He was 58. Tributes have poured in for the man who'd entertained 2 generations and survived 2 heart attacks.
The worry and the concern and the energy that he gave to everything cost him his life in the end, really, Eric, really working so hard and worrying so much, stressful,
Eric Morecambe's death symbolised the end of an era for the generation of entertainers who had made Britain a nation of television addicts. But while interest in them may have faded for a while, 20 years on, it's as if they've never gone away. Constant repeats of their shows, sketches and catchphrases, tributes and loving biographies all confirm their status as the pioneers of British television entertainment.
Racing driver extraordinaire James Hunt is profiled next Tuesday at 9. Coming up, the final page of Zadie Smith's White Teeth is about to turn. The prodigal son is back, and brotherly love is put to the ultimate test.